I'm worth not much, sir, but I can cook, the trembling black girl whispers, as cruel laughter echoes across the dusty auction square, her worn hands clutching a mysterious satchel, while townspeople sneer at the final unwanted bride. The crowd dismisses her with racial slurs and mockery, assuming she'll face a life of menial servitude or worse. Then the weathered rancher steps forward, not from pity, but recognizing something others missed in her quiet desperation. His 3 motherless children need more than another hired hand. They need someone who won't abandon them like death took their mama. But the girl harbors professional secrets that could transform their struggling homestead. While a dangerous pursuer tracks her across the frontier with forged legal documents. Can their unlikely union survive when her hidden past threatens to destroy the family they're building together? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside Cold Creek's dusty main street. Ruby Washington stepped down, her legs trembling from 3 days of hard travel. She clutched her worn leather satchel against her chest like armor. The driver tossed her single trunk to the ground without ceremony. Ruby's eyes swept the harsh frontier town. Wooden buildings lined the street like broken teeth. The September sun beat down mercilessly on her dark skin. She pulled her plain bonnet lower and walked toward the gathering crowd in the town square. At Morrison's general store, Jacob Mason counted his meager coins. His weathered hands shook slightly as he placed them on the counter. 3 pounds of flour, 2 cans of beans, salt pork that had seen better days. That all you can manage today, Jacob? Morrison's voice carried pity that stung worse than scorn. Jacob nodded. His ranch struggled since Martha's death 2 years ago. The children barely ate decent meals anymore. Emma tried her best, but 12 was too young to run a household. Tommy had grown thin and quiet. Little Sarah still asked when Mama was coming home. "Heard there's women available today," Morrison said carefully. "Might be worth considering." Jacob's jaw tightened. The annual bride auction felt wrong somehow. But his children needed more than he could provide alone. Outside the courthouse, a makeshift platform had been erected. Women stood in a ragged line, each carrying their few possessions. The townspeople gathered like vultures circling carrion. Margaret Kellerman held court among the other wealthy families, her expensive dress marking her status. "Look at this sorry lot," Margaret's voice carried across the square. "What decent man would want any of them?" The first woman was claimed quickly, a sturdy German immigrant who spoke broken English. The second went to a merchant from the next county over. One by one, the line shortened. Ruby stood last. Her stomach cramped from hunger. Her dress, once fine, showed signs of hard travel and harder times. The crowd's attention turned to her with visible disdain. "Well, well," someone called out. "Saved the best for last, did they?" Laughter rippled through the gathering. Ruby kept her eyes down. She had endured worse than their mockery. The bruises on her arms had finally faded, but the memories remained fresh. Sheriff Collins stepped forward to announce her. "Ruby Washington, age 26, no family, seeking work and shelter." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Ruby lifted her chin slightly. Her voice came out smaller than intended. "I'm worth not much, sir, but I can cook." More laughter erupted. A man near the front spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Cook what? Scraps and bones?" Margaret whispered something to her companions. Their tittering sounded like angry wasps. Jacob pushed through the crowd. His children trailed behind him reluctantly. Emma's face showed open hostility. Tommy hung back shyly. Sarah clung to her sister's skirt. "How much?" Jacob's voice cut through the noise. The auctioneer looked surprised. "Well, I suppose $50. Jacob reached into his pocket without hesitation. He counted out the bills slowly. The crowd murmured in shock. Ruby stared at him in disbelief. He was tall and lean, with gentle eyes that held deep sadness. His clothes were clean but patched. This was not a wealthy man making an impulse purchase. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Jacob nodded. He gathered her trunk and gestured toward a weathered wagon. The children climbed up silently. Ruby took her place on the hard wooden seat. The ride to the ranch passed in uncomfortable quiet. Emma glared at Ruby from the wagon bed. Tommy studied his boots. Sarah peeked over the side occasionally but said nothing. The Mason homestead sat in a valley surrounded by brown hills. The house needed paint and new shingles. The barn sagged slightly to one side, but it was shelter, and Ruby had learned not to expect more. Inside, the kitchen told the story of their struggle. The stove had a broken door that wouldn't close properly. Empty shelves lined the walls. A thin layer of dust covered everything. Ruby set down her satchel and rolled up her sleeves. She examined the stove carefully, running her fingers along the hinges. With gentle pressure and some repositioning, she managed to align the door properly. "How did you know to do that?" Emma's question carried suspicion. Ruby paused. She had learned appliance repair from watching the maintenance crew at the Grand Palace Hotel, but that life felt like a dangerous dream now. "Just seemed logical," she said carefully. Jacob showed her to a small room off the kitchen. A narrow bed and washstand comprised the furniture. Ruby nodded gratefully. She had slept in far worse places during her flight west. That evening, Ruby attempted her first meal. The pantry held little: some flour, dried beans, a few sad vegetables. She managed to create a thin stew. That was edible, but barely. The children picked at their food silently. Jacob ate without complaint, but Ruby saw the disappointment in his eyes. She had promised she could cook. This watery broth hardly qualified. After dinner, Ruby sat alone in the kitchen. She opened her satchel and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with string. Her hands shook as she held them over the lamp flame. The paper caught quickly, curling into ash. Jacob appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right?" "Just old recipes," Ruby lied. "No good to anyone now." He studied her face in the flickering light. Something in his expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Outside, a coyote howled in the darkness. Ruby shivered, though the night was warm. She could only hope that her past would stay buried in those ashes, and that this rough family might offer the sanctuary she desperately needed. Ruby woke before dawn. The broken stove had haunted her dreams. She crept into the kitchen and knelt beside it, running her hands along every surface. The firebox was clogged with old ash. The dampers were rusted shut. The flue needed clearing. She found tools in Jacob's workshop and set to work. Years of watching hotel maintenance crews had taught her more than cooking. She scraped away debris, oiled the hinges, and adjusted the airflow mechanisms. By sunrise, the stove drew air properly for the first time in months. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She watched Ruby's precise movements with curious suspicion. "Where did you learn that?" Ruby's hands paused on the wrench. "My father was handy with repairs." Another lie. Her father had been a sharecropper who died when she was 10, but the truth about her hotel training felt too dangerous to share. Jacob entered the kitchen and stopped short. The stove glowed with steady heat instead of its usual smoky sputter. Ruby had already started breakfast using techniques that made his meager supplies stretch further. She diced the salt pork with swift, even cuts that spoke of professional training. Her knife work was precise, economical. Each motion served a purpose. She built layers of flavor that transformed simple ingredients into something approaching restaurant quality. The bacon fat became the base for a proper roux. She whisked flour into it with practiced ease, creating a golden foundation that would have impressed any French chef. Dried herbs were toasted to release maximum flavor. Even the stale bread was salvaged into perfect golden croutons. Tommy crept downstairs, drawn by aromas he hadn't smelled since his mother's death. His eyes widened as Ruby plated their breakfast with careful attention to presentation. The simple fare looked elegant on their chipped dishes. Jacob took his first bite and froze. This wasn't frontier cooking. This was sophisticated cuisine disguised as humble fare. The flavors were complex, balanced, professional. "This is remarkable," he said, quietly. Ruby ducked her head, but pleasure colored her cheeks. She had forgotten how good it felt to cook for appreciative diners. Over the following days, Ruby transformed the Mason kitchen. She reorganized the pantry with military precision. Every ingredient had its designated space. Every tool hung in perfect order. The chaos of bachelor living gave way to professional efficiency. Her herb garden layout revealed knowledge that puzzled Jacob. She spoke of companion planting, soil drainage, and seasonal rotation with the expertise of a trained botanist. When he asked where she learned such things, she deflected with vague mentions of reading books. The real revelation came when neighbors began arriving uninvited at dinner time. Word had spread about the remarkable meals emerging from the Mason kitchen. Families who had barely acknowledged Jacob's struggles now found excuses to visit during the evening hours. Ruby rose to the challenge instinctively. She scaled recipes upward with mathematical precision that suggested institutional experience. When feeding 8 people instead of 4, she adjusted proportions without consulting notes or measurements. Her muscle memory guided her hands. When we served the Christmas banquet for 200 guests, we had to time everything perfectly, she said while coordinating multiple dishes. Then she caught herself, eyes widening with alarm. I meant when I helped serve at church, she corrected quickly. But Jacob had heard her clearly. 200 guests wasn't a church supper. That was hotel banquet service. Margaret Kellerman arrived one evening with her book club, ostensibly to check on Jacob's new arrangement. She expected to find frontier slop that would confirm her suspicions about Ruby's inadequacy. Instead, she encountered a 5-course meal that rivaled anything served in Denver's finest establishments. Ruby had transformed venison into perfectly seasoned medallions with herb-crusted surfaces. Root vegetables became elegant accompaniments with French preparation techniques. Even the simple apple dessert showed professional pastry skills. Margaret's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Where exactly did you learn to cook like this? Ruby's hands trembled as she served the next course. Just practice, ma'am. This isn't practice cooking. This is professional training. The kitchen fell silent except for the crackling fire. Ruby felt every eye upon her. The walls seemed to close in as her carefully constructed new identity began cracking. Emma surprised everyone by stepping forward. Ruby's been teaching me proper knife techniques. She knows things I never learned from Mama. Jacob nodded slowly. She's brought skills to this household that we desperately needed. Ruby's throat tightened with unexpected gratitude. These people were protecting her when they barely knew her story. But Margaret's sharp gaze missed nothing. I'm simply curious about her background. Such sophisticated cuisine suggests formal training. Ruby straightened her shoulders. The lies were becoming harder to maintain. These good people deserved better than deception. I worked in a hotel kitchen in San Francisco, she admitted quietly. I was the head chef at the Grand Palace Hotel for 3 years. Gasps echoed around the table. Emma's eyes widened with new respect. Tommy stared in amazement. Even little Sarah seemed to understand that Ruby was someone special. Jacob reached across the table and covered Ruby's hand with his own. Why didn't you tell us? Because I left under difficult circumstances. I didn't want my past to cause problems for your family. Margaret leaned forward with predatory interest. What kind of difficulties? Ruby's face shuddered closed. The kind that made me willing to become a mail-order bride rather than stay where I was. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Ruby prepared herself for rejection, for the suspicion and judgment she had feared since arriving in Cold Creek. Instead, Jacob squeezed her hand gently. Whatever brought you here, I'm grateful for it. You've given my children something I couldn't provide. Ruby felt tears threaten for the first time in months. Perhaps honesty might be safer than the lies that haunted her sleep. The Cold Creek Harvest Festival banner fluttered in the October breeze. Ruby stood at the Mason family booth, her hands steady despite the crowd gathering around their table. Word of her cooking had spread throughout the territory. People traveled from neighboring counties just to taste her food. She had prepared for 3 days straight. Venison Wellington with perfectly laminated pastry, root vegetables transformed into elegant terrines, wild berry tarts that looked like they belonged in a Parisian bakery. Each dish showcased techniques that shouldn't exist on the frontier. Emma worked beside her with newfound confidence. Ruby had taught her proper knife skills, sauce preparation, and plating techniques that elevated simple ingredients. The girl moved with precision that impressed the watching crowd. "Where on earth did you learn to make pastry like that?" Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch examined the golden Wellington crust with amazement. Ruby's hands never paused as she sliced portions with mathematical precision. Practice and good teachers. Jacob manned the serving table, pride evident in his posture. His children worked alongside Ruby like seasoned kitchen staff. The transformation of his family over the past month seemed miraculous to everyone watching. Margaret Kellerman approached with her usual entourage of wealthy wives. She had been circling the booth for an hour, her expression growing more perplexed with each dish she observed. "Ruby, dear," Margaret's voice carried across the crowd, "I simply must know where a mail-order bride acquired such extraordinary culinary skills." The festive chatter died around their booth. Ruby felt every eye turned toward her. The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. "I've always enjoyed cooking," Ruby replied carefully. "This isn't home cooking," Margaret pressed. "This is professional cuisine, restaurant quality, hotel standard even." Ruby's knife paused against the cutting board. The moment of reckoning had arrived. She could continue lying or finally trust these people who had shown her such kindness. "You're right," Ruby said quietly. "I was trained professionally." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Emma moved closer to Ruby's side, sensing the tension. "I worked as head chef at the Grand Palace Hotel in San Francisco for 3 years. Before that, I trained under French chefs who taught me classical techniques." The admission hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Sheriff Collins pushed forward through the stunned onlookers. His face showed concern rather than suspicion. "Ruby," he said gently, "I've been receiving telegrams about a missing woman matching your description. Someone's been looking for you." Ruby's face went pale. Her hands trembled as she set down her knife. The fear she had carried for months crystallized into sharp panic. "Who's looking for her?" Jacob stepped protectively closer to Ruby. "A businessman from San Francisco. Claimed she left owing money and took proprietary recipes." Ruby shook her head vigorously. "I left legally. I owed nothing. Those recipes were public knowledge. He says otherwise, has legal documents." The crowd began whispering among themselves. Ruby caught fragments of conversation. Some defended her. Others questioned whether they really knew this woman they had welcomed. Margaret's expression softened unexpectedly. "Ruby, tell us what really happened." Ruby looked around at the faces surrounding her. These people had become her community. Emma watched with fierce loyalty. Tommy and Sarah clung to Jacob's sides. Even some of the townspeople seemed more curious than hostile. "I started as a scullery maid when I was 14, Ruby began. "The hotel kitchen was brutal work, but I watched everything. The French chef, Henri Dubois, noticed my interest. He started teaching me after hours." She continued while automatically plating dishes, her hands finding comfort in familiar motions. "I learned sauce mother preparations, pastry techniques, meat fabrication. Henri said I had natural talent. Within 2 years, I was working the main line. By 23, I became the youngest head chef in San Francisco hotel history." Emma beamed with pride. "You were famous?" "In kitchen circles, yes. But the hotel owner, Clayton Forrester, became controlling. He claimed my recipes belonged to him, said my employment contract made me his property." Jacob's jaw tightened. "What kind of contract?" "The kind that wasn't legal, but he pretended it was. He tried to control every aspect of my life. Where I lived, who I spoke to, when I could leave the premises. When I finally escaped, he swore he would find me." Sheriff Collins frowned. "The man sending telegrams is named Clayton Forrester." Ruby's knees nearly buckled. Jacob caught her arm, steadying her against his side. "He's found me," she whispered. "Now hold on." Margaret's voice rang out clearly. "This young woman has done nothing but bring joy and prosperity to our community. Whatever this Forrester wants, he can go through proper legal channels." Nods of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ruby stared in amazement as people she barely knew stepped forward to support her. Ruby makes the best food in 3 counties, called out rancher Tom Wilson. We don't care about her past troubles. She's been nothing but kind and helpful, added Mrs. Patterson. If someone's bothering her, that's our concern too. Jacob took Ruby's hand publicly, his action sending a clear message to everyone watching. I chose her then, and I choose her now. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Ruby felt tears slide down her cheeks. For the first time in years, she wasn't facing her problems alone. These frontier people who had started as strangers now stood as her chosen family. But even surrounded by support, she knew Clayton Forrester wouldn't give up easily. He had tracked her across half the country. He wouldn't be deterred by a small town's loyalty. The festival continued around them, but Ruby's mind raced with dark possibilities. Her past had finally caught up to her peaceful new life. Clayton Forrester arrived in Cold Creek on the Tuesday morning stage. He cut an impressive figure in his expensive suit and polished boots. His silver watch chain caught the sunlight as he strode into the sheriff's office with practiced authority. Sheriff Collins examined the legal documents Clayton presented. The papers appeared official, complete with seals and signatures. They claimed Ruby had stolen proprietary recipes worth thousands of dollars and fled San Francisco to avoid prosecution. She's a clever thief, Clayton said smoothly. Gained my trust, learned my trade secrets, then disappeared in the night. The sheriff frowned at the paperwork. These look legitimate, but I know Ruby. She's been nothing but honest with us. Thieves are often charming, Sheriff. That's how they gain people's confidence. Ruby felt the noose tightening around her new life. She watched from the Mason kitchen window as Clayton conducted business around town. He spoke with merchants, townspeople, anyone who would listen to his version of events. Emma found her standing frozen at the window. Ma Ruby, you're scaring me. Ruby startled at the name the children had begun using. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm just thinking. About that man who's looking for you? Ruby nodded. Emma's mature understanding of the situation both impressed and saddened her. These children had already lost one mother to death. Now they might lose another to false accusations. Jacob returned from town with grim news. He's staying at the hotel. Says he'll wait as long as necessary for you to see reason and return with him. I can't go back, Ruby whispered. He'll destroy me. Then we fight his claims in court. Ruby shook her head. He has money, lawyers, influence. I have nothing. That evening, Clayton appeared at their door uninvited. He removed his hat with false courtesy and smiled at Ruby through the screen. Hello, Ruby. You've led me quite a chase. Jacob stepped between them. State your business and leave. I've come to collect my property. Ruby stole recipes worth considerable money. She owes me substantial damages. Ruby found her voice. Those recipes were common knowledge. You have no claim on them. Clayton's smile turned cold. The courts will decide that, unless, of course, you prefer to settle this matter privately. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ruby understood perfectly. Return willingly or face public humiliation and legal ruin. Over the next few days, Clayton's presence poisoned the town's atmosphere. Some residents began questioning Ruby's character. The legal documents looked convincing to people unfamiliar with sophisticated fraud. Margaret Kellerman surprised everyone by standing firmly in Ruby's corner. I don't care what his papers say. I've seen this woman's character with my own eyes. But doubt crept into other minds. The general store owner became distant. The bank president avoided eye contact. Fear of legal trouble made cowards of former supporters. Ruby began preparing for the inevitable. She packed her few belongings and wrote letters to the children explaining why she had to leave. Better to sacrifice herself than drag the Mason family into her destruction. Emma discovered her packing and burst into tears. You can't leave us again. We need you. I won't let my problems hurt your family. But you are our family now. Tommy and Sarah appeared in the doorway, their faces stricken with abandonment. Ruby's heart shattered at their expressions. Jacob found them huddled together and immediately understood. Absolutely not. You're not running away from this. He'll destroy all of us if I stay. Let him try. This family doesn't abandon each other. That night, Ruby couldn't sleep. She wandered to the kitchen and began preparing bread for the morning. The familiar motions calmed her racing thoughts. She thought about her journey from that terrified scullery maid to accomplished chef to desperate fugitive. Clayton had already stolen her career and reputation. She wouldn't let him steal this family too. Clayton made his final offer the next morning. Come back willingly, and I'll drop all charges. Stay here, and I'll see you in prison. Ruby looked around at the Mason family gathered behind her. Emma held Sarah's hand. Tommy stood close to his father. Jacob's jaw was set with determination. Give me until tomorrow to decide. Clayton nodded with smug satisfaction. Very wise. The morning stage leaves at 9. After he left, the family sat in heavy silence. Ruby had made her choice, but she needed them to understand it was necessary. There's something else I haven't told you about Clayton, she said quietly. He didn't just control my work. He tried to control everything. Where I lived, who I spoke to, what I did in my free time. Jacob's hands clenched into fists. He had no right. He believed he owned me completely. When I finally escaped, I took nothing but the clothes on my back and what little money I had saved. Emma moved closer to Ruby's side. You don't owe him anything. The law might see it differently. Ruby spent her last evening teaching Emma advanced techniques she hadn't shared yet. Mother sauces, pastry methods, seasoning combinations. She wanted to leave the girl with as much knowledge as possible. As darkness fell, Ruby walked to her room and began writing a letter to Jacob. She needed him to understand that leaving was her choice, made from love rather than cowardice. But as she wrote, smoke began seeping under her door. The acrid smell made her heart race with sudden terror. Fire. Someone had set the barn ablaze. She ran outside to see orange flames consuming the structure. Jacob's shouts echoed from inside the burning building as he tried to save the trapped animals. Ruby realized with crystal clarity that Clayton had grown tired of waiting. The flames roared 20 feet into the night sky. Ruby ran toward the barn as Jacob's voice echoed from inside the burning structure. He had gone in to free the horses and cattle before the fire spread to the house. "Papa!" Emma screamed from the porch where she held Tommy and Sarah back from the danger. Ruby reached the barn entrance as a support beam crashed down, blocking the main door. Smoke poured from every opening. The heat singed her eyebrows as she searched desperately for another way inside. Jacob's coughing grew weaker from somewhere deep in the burning building. Ruby grabbed an axe from the woodpile and attacked the barn's side wall where the boards looked oldest. The wood splintered under her desperate blows. She kicked through the opening she had created and plunged into the smoke-filled interior. The air burned her lungs with each breath. Orange light danced across the chaos of fallen beams and terrified animals. "Jacob!" she called out. A weak groan came from the far corner. Ruby crawled toward the sound, staying low beneath the choking smoke. She found Jacob pinned under a massive crossbeam, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "Ruby, get out!" he gasped. "The whole thing's coming down." She examined the beam that trapped him. Too heavy for her to lift alone, but she noticed the way it was wedged against a support post. If she could shift the angle just slightly, it might slide off him. Ruby braced her back against the post and pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed. The beam shifted inches. Jacob cried out as it scraped across his trapped leg, but the pressure lessened enough for him to pull free. "Can you stand?" Jacob tried to put weight on his injured leg and nearly collapsed. Ruby pulled his arm over her shoulder and began dragging him toward the hole she had made. Each step was agony as the smoke burned their throats and the heat intensified around them. The roof groaned ominously above their heads. Ruby knew they had seconds before the entire structure collapsed. She half-carried, half-dragged Jacob the final yards to the opening. Emma appeared at the hole, reaching in to help pull her father to safety. They tumbled out into the cool night air just as the barn roof caved in with a thunderous crash. Sparks shot skyward like deadly fireworks. Ruby rolled away from the collapsing structure, gasping for clean air. "There," Emma pointed toward the tree line. "Someone's running away." Ruby squinted through the smoke and flames. A figure in expensive clothing fled toward the road where a horse waited. Even from a distance, she recognized Clayton's distinctive silhouette. Sheriff Collins arrived with a bucket brigade from town. The volunteers formed a chain to prevent the fire from spreading to the house, but the barn was already lost. By dawn, only charred timbers and ash remained of Jacob's largest outbuilding. Emma approached the sheriff with something clutched in her small hands. "I found this near where the fire started." She opened her palm to reveal a silver watch chain, the same chain Ruby had seen glinting from Clayton's vest every day since his arrival. "That's his," Ruby said grimly. "He must have dropped it when he set the fire." Sheriff Collins examined the chain carefully. Engraved initials confirmed its ownership. "This is evidence of arson. I'll arrest him immediately." But when they reached the hotel, Clayton's room was empty. The desk clerk reported he had checked out before sunrise, claiming urgent business in Denver. "He's running," the sheriff said. "Guilty men always run." Jacob lay in his bed with his leg splinted and bandaged. The town doctor had confirmed no permanent damage, but recovery would take weeks. Ruby sat beside him, her hands still shaking from their ordeal. "You saved my life," Jacob said quietly. "You would have done the same for me." "That's not the point. You risked everything to pull me out of that fire." Ruby looked at his soot-stained face and realized something had shifted between them. The crisis had burned away pretense and revealed the truth of their feelings. Emma burst into the room carrying a leather satchel. "Look what I found near the road where that man's horse was tied." She dumped the contents onto Jacob's bed. Legal documents scattered across the quilt. But these papers looked different from the ones Clayton had shown the sheriff. Ruby's hands trembled as she examined them. "These are the real documents from the Grand Palace Hotel." The authentic papers told a completely different story. Ruby's employment had ended legitimately. Her final payment showed she owed nothing to the hotel. Most importantly, a letter from the hotel's lawyer stated that Clayton Forrester had been terminated for fraudulent business practices. "He forged everything," Ruby breathed. The documents he showed Sheriff Collins were fake. Emma grinned with satisfaction. "I also found this." She produced another set of papers from different territories. Clayton had used identical schemes in Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. He tracked down former employees and used forged legal documents to extort money from them. Sheriff Collins studied the evidence with growing anger. "This man is a professional criminal. I'm sending telegrams to every territory west of here." Margaret Kellerman arrived with food and flowers for Jacob's recovery. When she learned about the evidence, her face lit up with vindication. "I knew that man was trouble from the moment I saw him. Ruby, you're completely cleared of any wrongdoing." Ruby sank into the chair beside Jacob's bed. The weight of months of fear and running finally lifted from her shoulders. Clayton's scheme had collapsed, and his flight made him look guilty to everyone. "It's over," Jacob said, reaching for her hand. Ruby nodded, but tears slipped down her cheeks. Relief mixed with exhaustion and the lingering terror of nearly losing him in that fire. The Mason family was safe. Her past no longer threatened their future. For the first time since fleeing San Francisco, Ruby could imagine a life without fear. Jacob recovered slowly over the following weeks. Ruby tended to him with the same precision she brought to her cooking. She prepared healing broths, managed his pain with willow bark tea, and supervised his physical therapy with gentle determination. During his convalescence, the children drew closer to Ruby than ever before. Emma called her Ma Ruby without hesitation now. Tommy brought her wildflowers from his daily walks. Little Sarah climbed into Ruby's lap each evening for bedtime stories. Sheriff Collins received confirmation from 3 territories about Clayton's criminal activities. The man had been arrested in Denver trying to run the same scheme on a former restaurant manager. His pattern of fraud stretched back years. "You're completely vindicated," the sheriff told Ruby. "Every document he showed was forged. The real hotel records prove you left legally with no debts." Margaret Kellerman used her social connections to spread the truth throughout the territory. Ruby's reputation was not only restored, but enhanced by the dramatic revelation of Clayton's deception. On a crisp November morning, Jacob walked without his crutch for the first time. Ruby was kneading bread when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving carefully but steadily. "The leg's almost healed," he said. Ruby smiled without looking up from her work. "Dr. Patterson said you're lucky it wasn't worse. I'm lucky in more ways than one." Something in his tone made her pause. Jacob moved closer, his expression serious but warm. "Ruby, there's something I need to say." She wiped flour from her hands and faced him fully. "When I was trapped in that burning barn, I thought about dying, about leaving the children orphaned. But mostly I thought about never telling you how much you mean to this family." Ruby's breath caught in her throat. "You didn't just save my life that night. You saved all of us months ago when you agreed to come here. This house was dying before you arrived." Jacob reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. Ruby recognized it as the one his late wife had worn. "This belonged to Martha," he said gently. "She was a good woman and a loving mother, but she's gone, and we're still here. We've built something new together." Ruby stared at the ring through sudden tears. "I'm not asking you to replace her memory. I'm asking you to help me create something different, a new kind of love for a new kind of family. Jacob, I don't know what to say. Say you'll marry me, not out of duty or convenience, but because you want to build a life here with us." Ruby took the ring with trembling fingers. It felt warm from being carried close to his heart. "Yes," she whispered. "I want that more than anything." The children erupted from their hiding places behind the kitchen door, where they had obviously been eavesdropping. Emma threw her arms around Ruby while Tommy and Sarah danced with excitement. "Does this mean you're really our mama now?" Sarah asked. Ruby knelt to the little girl's level. "If you'll have me." "We already had you," Emma said with teenage wisdom. "This just makes it official." The wedding took place on a sunny December morning. The entire town attended, including people who had initially doubted Ruby. She wore a simple blue dress that Margaret had helped her sew. Emma and Sarah scattered wildflowers down the church aisle. Ruby's wedding cake showcased all her professional skills. 3 tiers of perfectly balanced flavors with decorative piping that amazed the guests. She had stayed up all night creating a masterpiece that would be remembered for years. During the reception, Jacob made a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "Ruby came to us as a stranger asking for little more than shelter. She's given us more than we ever dared hope for. A real home, a loving mother for my children, and a partner for whatever comes next." Ruby stood beside her new husband, surrounded by the family she had found in the most unlikely place. The frightened woman from the bride auction felt like a distant memory. That winter, Ruby began planning her restaurant. The town council offered her the empty building next to the general store at favorable terms. Word of her cooking had spread throughout the territory. Travelers were already asking when they could sample her famous cuisine. Margaret became her unlikely business partner, investing in equipment and supplies. Their friendship had grown from mutual respect into genuine affection. "You'll need proper ovens," Margaret said, studying Ruby's sketches. "And a larger staff once word spreads further." Ruby smiled at her friend's confidence. One step at a time. Emma proved invaluable as her assistant chef. The girl had absorbed Ruby's lessons with natural talent that promised a bright future. Tommy managed the herb garden with scientific precision. Even Sarah helped by greeting customers with charming smiles. The Mason family kitchen opened the following spring to a crowd that stretched around the block. Ruby's menu featured sophisticated dishes made from local ingredients. Her reputation drew visitors from as far as Denver and Salt Lake City. Jacob expanded the ranch with profits from the restaurant. The children excelled in their studies. The family that had been broken by loss became stronger through their choice to rebuild together. On quiet evenings, Ruby sat at her kitchen table writing in her journal. She recorded recipes, family stories, and reflections on the journey that had brought her to this unexpected happiness. One entry captured her transformation perfectly. "I once believed I was worth very little, a woman running from her past with nothing to offer but the ability to cook. I was wrong about everything except the cooking. I was worth exactly what I needed to be worth to the people who chose to see my value. I was worth a family's healing. I was worth a community's respect. I was worth a love I never dared imagine possible. The frightened woman who had whispered those desperate words at the bride auction had found her true worth in the most unlikely place, surrounded by people who saw her not as she feared she was, but as she was capable of becoming.